The world has never been a better place to live in than it is today. At least that's what Steven Pinker will tell you. And I have no reason to doubt that on many metrics that we might typically measure these things, it probably is. Certainly in many of the historically poorer regions of the world, that is truer than has been for quite some time. But these generalized global analyses run roughshod over a few important details and conceal the extent to which this can continue. The post-Second World War period has been fairly short, historically speaking, but has been long enough that the average person in the developed world no longer realizes that it has been an economically unusual time, historically speaking. A century of reckoning with the failures of the Industrial Revolution produced an economic and political system in developed countries that balanced capitalism with socialism, liberty with regulation. For more than 2 generations, every parent and child in the developed world could grow up knowing that on average, each day would be better than the last. Today, children in these countries live in a world better than the one just after the Second World War, except in one very crucial way. On average, each day will not be better than the last. Within our economic system operate 3 key groups. Loosely categorized, these are corporations, workers, and governance. Governance includes the government, but also the apparatus required to regulate labour and markets. Corporations can take a variety of forms, but what is most relevant here are multinational corporations. Workers are the vast majority of people whose lives are being systematically made bleaker, one day at a time, and who are being deceived into pointing a finger at each other for the problems we face. Wealth inequality is growing tremendously, especially in developed countries, and the work of corporations to dismantle the labour market is starting to have damaging effects. National regulation of corporations in the past brought greater equality to developed nations, but at the expense of greater exploitation in foreign nations. However, governance has remained stagnant and reticent, and rather than extending regulation to those being exploited, the exploitation of workers has been extended into developed nations through the systematic vilification of regulations. Having been a privileged society for as long as we have, many don't realise that these problems aren't new, or those blinded by their continuing to benefit from the system are simply in denial. And while some write off any capitalist critique the moment they get a whiff of Marx, others become obsessed with uncritically pointing out capitalism's flaws. I think that seeking equal wealth, equal pay, equal reward, and generally trying to erase disparities is a fool's errand. But by now, I feel like this should be a banal point to reasonable people. But unfortunately, those opposed to socialism don't take the next few steps. How much disparity is warranted? Is all owned wealth merited? How much unearned wealth are we willing to tolerate for any innovation that is produced? In a fairly rudimentary way, I think a lot of people are happy to accept capitalism, to the extent that one should be rewarded relative to their contribution to the world. And without getting too bogged down in upbringing, free will, and philosophy, this seems fairly reasonable. And that's what we should be talking about. Fair and reasonable. The problem is that after a few $1 million, does the average person really have any idea what amounts of money we're talking about? What exactly is the merit behind someone who earns enough to buy 10 average homes every year, or 100, or in Elon Musk's case, 612? You'll have your work cut out to convince me that it is fair and reasonable that Elon Musk is worth $240 billion.